Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, boot fitters. Colin Martin, Solutions for Feet. Today we are joined by Billy Kaplan of Performance Podorfix and Gord Pransky from Critical Parts is where he's hanging out at the moment. Gord's just having some technical difficulties. He has come to join us, so Gord is in the building. What we're going to do is talk about footbeds, all sorts of wonderful things about footbeds today, guys. So
Hey.
We're going to let everybody kick off. I think, Gord, are you there okay with some sound now? Can you hear us?
Yeah. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can hear you okay. So if you want to kick off where you were.
Okay, sounds good. Welcome, guys. I'm here from the beautiful mountains of British Columbia. So we're here to talk about footbeds and several things. I want to start off with a little bit of myths about footbeds and ski orthotics. There was a little bit of some interesting stuff going on earlier on our page about about not using orthotics for several reasons. So I just want to bust some of these myths. I've heard a lot of stuff about people saying sometimes in the past that orthotics or footbeds are problematic in ski boots because they block pronation or they stop the foot from pronating. The two issues I have with that is that orthotics do not do that. A pronation force in the body is a very strong force, and an orthotic inside a ski boot cannot stop pronation. The other thing is contrary to some what instructors and coaches say, pronation is not necessary to turn a ski. There are three planes that occur in a pronation. One is eversion, one is dorsiflexion, and the other one is abduction. We don't use abduction to turn a ski. We adduct. So adduction is the steering force involved. Dorsiflexion is ankle flexion. And then the eversion is what we use for edging pressure. So I want to sort of break that myth and stop people from thinking that orthotics are bad and interfere with proper skiing. And the other thing I wanted to talk about is basically to say that an orthotic or a custom footbed is not an arch support. We do not support the arch. We support from the rear foot. We correct the rear foot and let everything else fall in line from there. The idea is basically we want to stack the bones. That's a term that instructors should understand and be a little closer to their hearts. So as I said, that an orthotic doesn't stop pronation, it stabilizes the foot. The proper function of a properly made orthotic, it's to limit the endpoint range of motion of the foot, or in cases where the foot has a very limited endpoint or where most of the range of motion is already being used just to stand up. What the orthotic can do is actually to prop that foot up so that there's more range of motion available before it gets to the endpoint. The second function of an orthotic is to decrease the speed or the rate of speed at which that foot hits its endpoint of range of motion, effectively making the foot more efficient within the boot and allowing it to do its job. Think of it as like a leaf spring or a shock absorber, and helping the foot just function better. It does not stop the foot from moving. It amplifies the motions in the foot and makes it more efficient. So now that I got that out of the way, basically what we're going to do is I just want to talk one more thing. There was one comment also about eversion or pronation of the foot and tibial rotation. In theory, the subtalar joint, which is the joint we're acting on mostly when we're making a custom footbed, is a torque converter. Now that basically means as the foot pronates and rolls in, the tibia rolls in with it. That is mostly the case, but what can happen sometimes in a severely pronated foot, like you'll see in one of my case studies, the case study coming up, I think it's case study number 3. Anyways, it's the guy that I've nicknamed Bilbo. The foot is so severely pronated and the subtalar joint is what we call laterally deviated, that torque converter gets decoupled. So basically what happens is the foot just rolls in and there isn't as much tibial rotation at all. In fact, what ends up happening a lot of the time is you get increased tibial varum or genu varum. All right, Colin, I'm ready to talk about some of the slides.
Okay.
Okay, so this is my flexible pes cavus in case 1. This guy came in, and I posted pictures on the forum about this guy. So he's got a pretty high arched foot, but this foot, the right foot, did pronate and roll in a little bit. He was having medial ankle problems in his boot. It was actually in a snowboard boot. And then we can go on to the second slide and compare the right and left foot. So it's a little bit difficult to see, but you can see that that right ankle is a little bit more prone than the left ankle. So even though it's a very high arched foot, it doesn't mean you don't make an orthotic or a footbed for it. Sometimes that's another thing that people think, oh, you don't have a flat foot, so we don't need to make a footbed. The high arched foot is a less common foot deformity, but it still needs to be addressed, particularly in footwear like ski boots, snowboard boots, and skates. Yeah, so the next slide, we'll see he had on his left foot an imbalance in the forefoot. The first ray was plantar flex, so it was sticking down with regards to the other metatarsals. So what was happening is we weren't actually seeing in the picture one of the reasons that the ankle on the left foot wasn't sticking in or going medially as much as the right one was because that first metatarsal was sitting down and it was making the foot invert. So as you can see on the device that has that black posting material, what I've done is put a second to fifth metatarsal platform. We call it a reverse Morton's extension. And what that does is it brings the ground up to the second metatarsal through the fifth metatarsal. And it basically allows the forefoot to sit more balanced. The other thing I wanted to bring to your attention is the rear foot posting on this footbed. If you'll notice, it's oblique. It doesn't go straight across. It extends much further on the lateral side of the footbed. The reason for that is that I wanted to support the cuboid, the lateral arch of the foot, or the cuboid. Sometimes we call it a cuboid lock, and that stops the foot from inverting excessively without pushing the foot into pronation. It stops the foot from rotating outwards and keeps it more rectus. And we can go to the next slide now. Okay, so this is a view of the footbeds from the top, showing that lateral platform on the left foot. As you can see, it's relatively thick. It's probably about 3 millimeters, and it extends to the sulcus space. It sits right underneath the metatarsal heads, but doesn't sit underneath the first metatarsal at all, just allowing it to sit down. Okay, and then I think we have another view of it coming up. So that's just more of a close-up. It also shows the arch profile. It's relatively high, but it also shows the curvature from the ball to the heel. There's a fair amount of rise through the center of the footbed, and that's just to give the foot a bit of a sprung feeling so that it actually can absorb shock. Because as most of you know, a pes cavus foot, even if it's rigid, will, especially if it's rigid, will have very little shock absorption. So you want to try to raise up the midfoot, not on the medial side only. You want to raise it up right across the arch so that it gives it some shock absorption. That is obviously if the boot will allow it. If you have them in the right kind of boot, which allows proper instep space, you can spring the arch a little bit, and that will definitely help out. All right, next slide, please.
That is the end of that case. Are you going to the second one, Gord? Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Just a quick question. I'm getting a lot of music feedback in my headphones.
It's Billy's phone, I think. I've just muted him.
Okay, cool. All right. Thanks. Okay, so case 2. Am I going too quickly?
Yeah, you're doing good, I think.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so this is Frodo. So he's got flexible flat foot. Again, one of the cases that I had put in the group last week or the week before, and he's got some pretty flat feet. Well, as it's pretty obvious, we're going to take you on to the next slide there. So this is the finished footbed. It's just basically a view to show you how much correction that we got out of this foot. It doesn't look like a ton, but I got his foot pretty much corrected to the arch to the full height that it would go. And one of the views that you're going to see is him standing on the footbed. And despite the fact that I got him fully corrected, you'll see that when he's standing on it, let's go to the next slide, please, Colin. So again, this is just the same from the back. You can see how much posting there is. I got most of the correction occurs in the casting. I call it intrinsic correction, and that occurs in the casting, but you can see that there is some lateral slope to the heel cups. And again, that's just a little bit of extrinsic posting, but it's not as much as it actually looks. And we'll go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so that's him standing on the footbeds. As you can see, it still looks like he's pronating pretty close to the same amount as he was without them. But you can see there's a lot more medial bulge of the soft tissue, excuse me, at the apex and at the posterior part of the arch. The reason for that is because I use a pretty flexible footbed. I do that because I don't want to, again, get the dreaded lockup of the foot. The footbed does have to have some give, but once that footbed is inside the boot and working with the boot, essentially once the medial wall of the footbed touches the side of the ski boot in the liner, it's not going to allow as much flex. So you've noticed that my rear posts don't go all the way to the ball of the foot. I rarely do that. The reason for that is I just don't want to make the orthotic too rigid. So once that footbed is inside the ski boot and they're working together as a system, the foot is going to be rolled in much less and the foot will be much more efficient. Okay, are we on to the next case now?
Hey, Gord, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
On that first case study, usually when I encounter feet, this pes cavus foot, I encounter a lot of abduction happening from the hip on the femur and kind of rotating everything outward. Did you encounter that with this client?
I didn't actually check that with this guy, partially because he was a snowboarder. I know that's kind of a lame excuse. But yeah, in general, you will, especially I would suspect that I would have found that on the left foot, especially the one that has the plantar flex first. As the foot's externally rotating, the whole chain would be externally rotated. But the stance wasn't abducted. And as I said, I didn't check his hips, but that generally is the case, that there's external rotation all the way up the kinetic chain.
How about was he able to tolerate that much spring in the device? Yeah,
I actually find myself questioning myself when I make some of these orthotics and look at them, and it kind of looks like I've made them a perch instead of an orthotic, and I'm kind of thinking, yeah, this is the limit, man. This guy's not going to tolerate this. And as soon as he stands on it, he's like, oh my God, that feels so good. You know, and then you think, okay, well, once it's in the boot, it's going to be no way, man. And, you know, they do. Because for once in their life, they are actually feeling something in their arch and not just the heel and the ball. And I've had people say to me, particularly in gait orthotics, it's like, wow, I'm actually feeling a spring in my step. But again, it depends on what
Go ahead.
No, that's fine.
How about from a leg length differential, being that one leg was right, if I remember correctly, being more pronatory, was there a leg length differential too?
There wasn't in this case.
Okay.
I usually do check for that kind of thing. At least for skiing and snowboarding, just I do a quick hip check, and there wasn't anything anything excessive at all. Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much.
But it's a good point. It is a good point. When you see pronation on one side and not on the other, then that's one thing you definitely want to be looking for. And like I said, I think the first metatarsal plantar flex first was masking the eversion on the left foot.
Was that plantar flexed first? Was that very rigid?
It was what I call semi-rigid. It wasn't fully locked. In the non-weight bearing assessment phase, it was semi-flexible, but I suspect that once he was standing, it was more rigid because the foot was slightly more inverted because of it. If I felt that it was really flexible, I wouldn't have posted it.
And then last question from an assessment of his ankle foot range of motion in dorsiflexion. Usually we're finding with that type of physiology too, you're lacking of range of motion in dorsiflexion.
Yeah, and that's a given as far as I'm concerned. It's a good point that you brought it up, and it actually reminds me of something else, something that we have to keep in mind when we're making custom footbeds. So I'm just going to go off on a little bit of tangent here. That when we're making custom footbeds, sometimes when people pronate excessively, it's because they have a limited ankle range of motion. Even if it's a pes cavus, if it's a flexible pes cavus, that limited ankle range of motion is going to cause the mid-tarsal joint to collapse and compensate. So we have to remember that when we're making a custom footbed and taking that body compensation away, we are limiting ankle range of motion further. So it's going to be potentially even worse than it was before the footbed. So I know some people don't like the use of heel lifts. I'm not in that camp, but that is definitely one of the times that you're going to have to be looking at using a heel lift. It's just not avoidable because that footbed is taking ankle range of motion away.
Right. And lastly, touching on the terminology heel lift, I don't ever use that anymore. I use a foot leveling system. We're leveling things out. And I don't want anybody to get the idea that I'm actually lifting anything. I level things out. I put you more into the power band of that whole joint complex.
Bring the ground up to meet the.
Exactly. That's what I was just about to say, Colin. It's a much better way of saying it because the term heel lift has taken a bit of a negative connotation.
Yeah, and when you have an instructor that sees that word heel lift, and then they've been told either by anecdotally or by a friend of theirs or by a racer that they would never use something that would lift them up, and then it goes from myth to fact.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's too many people out there that I used the term earlier with you guys, the Bodie syndrome, where, somebody finds out that Bodie Miller didn't use footbeds. He couldn't tolerate them. They were no good for him. And all of a sudden, well, if it worked for Bodie, it must be good for everybody. And there's no one size fits all solution for skiing. I mean, everybody's body is so different that you could get 3 people come in with the same look of the foot, the same presentation, but you'd treat them all differently.
Yeah, and the Bodie punch, everybody wanted to do that Bodie punch on the boot, and it was like, why? Why do you think you need this? Right.
Yeah. And that's one of the questions. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Gord.
One of the questions on one of these case studies, I believe it was the one we just finished, one of the members asked, well, why wouldn't you he didn't call it a Bodie punch, but he basically said, why wouldn't you just punch the foot in that area to make space for it, as opposed to trying to push it over into supination? And my answer was that I'm not supinating the foot. I'm bringing it back into, as you said, I like that term, the power band. I'm bringing it back into what I call rectus. I don't use the term neutral anymore either because it's what is neutral.
Correct.
I brought it back into rectus to give it that power, to give it that ability to start from us. Sorry, Colin?
Yeah, neutral is somewhere between first and reverse.
Yeah.
Before we move on to the... Sorry, carry on.
No, go ahead.
Now, before we move on to the next case study, a question came in. I can't see who posted it, but have you got any picture of Frodo's foot unweighted?
Yeah, you know
Something
what?
you maybe add to the.
I missed out on getting a picture of Frodo's foot, period, in the first case, but when he came back to get the orthotics fitted into his snowboard boots, I got the picture of his foot, and I didn't get an unweighted one. I'm going to have to do a better job if I'm going to do a case study of getting pictures. His arch was higher. Basically, what happened is the foot sat in more an inverted, the forefoot sat in more of an inverted hanging position, and the forefoot sat lower than the heel. It was kind of just hanging there. It looked higher, and as Billy's nodding, that's the typical presentation of a cavus foot when it's not weighted. That his was flexible. I could push the forefoot up without the ankle dorsiflexing to a certain degree. A rigid pes cavus, as soon as you try to push the forefoot up, the ankle's going to dorsiflex.
Okay, guys, we've got 10 people watching so far and only 2 likes. And the algorithm on Facebook says the more likes we have, the more of you will see this. So please hit the like button. Love it. Hate it if you want. But likes are good. We like likes. Okay, Gord, you ready to move on to your third case study?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, bring up case 3.
Okay, so here's Bilbo. Came in the same day as Frodo. That's why the nickname. I thought Frodo was pretty flat, and then this guy showed up. So as you can see, he's really flat. And Billy's comment was that we must have had a higher gravity coefficient that day. The interesting thing that you will see on this picture is it looks like his left foot is much flatter than the right. Mm-hmm. As you know, it's quite obvious. This is what I would call early stage of posterior tibial tendon dysfunction. The only reason I'm saying early is this guy is in his mid to late 20s, so he's got further to go, and his navicular's not touching the ground yet. So
hey,
this is one. Yes, Billy.
Hey, on that left foot, if you look just below that medial ankle bone, that medial malleolus, you can see the swelling starting there too.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is when we go to the next slide, you'll see that the right seems to be more pronated or more internally positioned than the left. So it's interesting because you wouldn't expect to see that, but I see it a lot. I'll see situations where from the front, my patient's left foot is extremely pronated in the medial section or bulging in the medial section, and then you'll see them from behind, and the calcaneus is straight up and down on that foot that looks like it's more everted or pronated. And then you look at the opposite one, and the calcaneus is everted, and there's appears to be more of a medial bulge. Why? I don't know. This is probably a good time to start talking about that comment where I made about the decoupling of the subtalar joint and the subtalar joint being laterally deviated. This guy, I would suggest if we were to map the subtalar joint, we'd find that it is more to the lateral side of the foot, and that's why basically it seems like the tibia is sitting more medially and much more to the center. So yeah, let's go take a look at the next picture. And in this picture, if you look really closely, because of the angle, partially the reason I included this picture is to see how much more tib varum, or not tib varum, genu varum we have. And again, that left foot looks a little bit more pronated than the right. He didn't change his stance between pictures, so it's almost like camera angle. Again, not 100% sure, but you can see that it does seem that on the right side there is more, the knee is out more on the right side.
Hey, Gord.
So yes.
Hey, and one thing I was going to mention in some kind of assessment is it's so important to look at that foot from the front and the back, and this is just a beautiful case to show why, where that one foot is definitely different from the other one from the front and the back, and then just looking from the back, you can see that fifth and maybe part of the fourth, depending on the angle you're looking at, peeking out, whereas on that right side, you can see a little bit of that fifth. So there's definitely a huge difference here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of the obscuring the fifth on the right is that there is that increased lateral knee angle, but it is hard to tell. I mean, you can tell that the right heel's a little closer to the frame too. So it's not like I was taking pictures here for research and getting things
Right.
lined up perfectly. So there is a little bit of camera angle stuff going on. It was just one of those things where I thought, okay, this is the third case. Let's get some good pictures for these guys. But I really should try to line things up better.
So when you
Yeah,
mentioned about the subtalar joint axis, you said it was
yeah,
more laterally deviated?
yeah. So basically, there's a lot more force required to supinate the foot because it is more towards the outside of the foot as opposed to the inside.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah, that's something Kirby's done a lot of, mapping the subtalar joint and determining the supinatory forces that are involved. And a lot of the time they're not even when they're testing or looking at the foot, like for instance Craig Payne and Kevin Kirby, and that field or that group, when they're assessing the foot weight bearing, they don't care what the foot looks like. It doesn't matter if it's pronated or what the calcaneus is doing. What they're testing is supinatory forces. There's actually a device that they've got that you stand on, and it anchors in the cuboid arch, and it's a strap that comes over underneath the MLA and up, and you basically there's a little bit of a meter on it, and as you pull up, you can see how much force it takes to get the foot to resupinate, and
Right.
they're measuring that as opposed to what position the foot is in statically.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of his work with the measuring of the subtalar joint axis and mapping it out and
Yeah,
showing you where it's actually going.
yeah, yeah. And there's some feet that he'll measure the axis and he won't even bother making an orthotic for because he can predict that it'll
Right.
fail, and that's when you're looking at using um, a PTTD splint. But basically, if you think about it, a ski boot is a PTTD splint. So if we're making a good footbed within the ski boot, then that's sort of irrelevant. I mean, you
Did
might
he?
have to make space.
Did you recommend that he wear the ski boot around the house then?
No,
Well,
no,
15
he
hours
had no
before going
pain.
again.
He had no pain, and he doesn't wear orthotics on a regular basis. And this is kind of where I failed, is that I'm so focused on just ski boot fitting where I am at the resort that I didn't even think of talking to him about using orthotics outside of his ski boots. In fact, in Revelstoke, it's such a small town. There's barely any providers. There's like one physio clinic, that makes orthotics, and that's about it. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I put him in a Technica Zero G, which you would think that foot would not fit comfortably in, and it felt like a slipper. There was no need
Right.
to move any plastic whatsoever.
The
We'll see after
you know
he
that
goes touring, but
the that PTTD, he looks like he's like in stage 2 already and going to be
yeah,
going into stage 3 soon if he doesn't get any
yeah.
intervention there.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah, before we move on, Gord, quick questions come in from John McIntyre. Neutral seem to be always an easy concept for consumers to understand. What alternative would you suggest to the average consumer? What would you suggest?
That's a good question, John. John's an old Superfeet guy, so I'm not surprised to get that question from him. Well, yeah, the problem with neutral, as I think I mentioned, is that it's kind of like shooting a dart at a dartboard, and three different people can do it and get different results, and that's their neutral. I use the term basically just straight. I will use the technical term I use is rectus, which I believe is Latin for straight, and that's pretty much it. For some consumers, I will use the term neutral, but when talking to other specialists, I don't. I tend not to use it.
Yeah, in my practice doing ski boot insoles and orthoses, I try to stay away from neutral too, and
Yeah.
it's really challenging to find a word that will connect with a client or your patient or a consumer other than neutral. They understand what neutral means, and it's kind of like in between. So,
Yeah.
We have to figure out another word for neutral. That means with my eyes, this is where I think your foot is kind of naturally should be.
Balance,
Yeah.
best functioning
Balanced.
position.
Yeah, I like balanced, and I tend to avoid using any kind of medical terms
Right.
with customers.
Right.
I find in a lot of cases, some people just use them to sound impressive, and I think all it does is confuse.
Exactly.
If I get somebody in that I found is using some terms, then I will use them because they're probably a physio or a doctor or chiro or something like that, and I want to talk to their level. But for the average, as John said, the average Joe, I'm not going to try to sound impressive. And yeah, I like Colin's term balanced, and I think that really speaks to people.
And so we should raise the flag on replacing the heel lift with a leveling device or bringing the floor up to the foot, and we're going to place your foot in a more comfortably balanced position.
Yeah.
Trying to remove the stress. We want the foot as everything, so there's no tension, there's no stress. Oh, we've lost Gord again, I think. Please don't go, Gord. Please don't go. He's frozen.
All right, so why don't I continue a little bit then, and we're going to we'll get Gord back to reboot up everything.
So, if you want to start, what do you want to head off onto, Billy? I know you were looking at where it all goes wrong.
Well, let's the one thing I wanted to start off with, which I started touching on with Gord, is literally when you get that client or that patient or that customer in front of you, and you are assessing them. What are you looking for? Now, I see Gord just came back, so why don't we continue on with Gord?
Straight back to Gord. You're there. Let's straight back to your.
All right. Stuck with my ugly mug again. Okay. Okay, so this shows you how much correction you can get out of the systems that we use in the shops. I am really, really impressed with the systems that we have available to us today. So as everybody knows, this is the CDAS system, but I've had great results from other systems that are available. The BootDoc system is very similar. The MasterFit system, those are the three that I've used. I've used another system that was sort of a subset of the MasterFit system that used beeswax and that kind of thing, and they're all fantastic. I mean, the definition that we're getting, I would say, is better than what I was using in clinic, and would use this in a clinic to make orthotics for customers, regular gait orthotics. So as you can see, I've got the foot here. Well, I'm going to throw neutral out, but it's rectus or it's balanced. I don't feel that it's either supinated or pronated. If you do look closely at the first metatarsal, the first ray, this foot was the one that I felt, even though the pictures didn't indicate it from the front, this foot was the more pronated of the two. And you can see when you look at the first metatarsal head, there is space there behind it. It is sitting up in the air. Now, what that indicates is that there is a lot of soft tissue deformity. Basically, from being stretched out and pronated so much, the tissues on the top of the foot have shortened, and the ones on the bottom of the foot have elongated. So it has a tendency to be pulled up. So even though we're in that situation, I don't post that. You do not stick anything underneath that, because you're going to defeat the purpose of correcting the rear foot. Because when a foot pronates and it elongates out and the ground is pushing up underneath the first metatarsal head, that's elongating the foot, and it stretches that arch out. So basically, I let that hang. I control the rear foot, keeping it in that balanced rectus position, and once it gets in the boot, just being in the boot will have it sit down. It doesn't have its own ability to support itself anyways, so putting anything underneath it isn't going to bring the ground up to it, it's going to bring the ground through it. So I just leave that alone.
Hey,
so
Hey, so from that cuboid bone, when you're building a device like that, How
Yeah.
high are you building that lateral border from the cuboid bone on back, or even the base of the fifth? Are you really creating a nice lateral tab on that, or are you
Yes.
going lower than that?
No, usually I do bring the lateral border up when I'm correcting a foot that much, especially if it's going in a shoe. But if it's going in a ski boot, I still will bring it up as much as I can, at least from just proximal or distal to the cuboid area, so that it's balanced there and it's being locked, and the foot doesn't have a tendency to want to roll out or abduct off the footbed. Even though it's in a ski boot, there will be those forces. So you want to keep it balanced from the midfoot back. Sometimes I did an oblique post on this guy. I believe I did an extended medial oblique. So it's longer on the medial side, but it does go distal to the cuboid. If he wasn't as pronated, yeah, there you can see it. So you can see that post, it goes right into the midfoot. It's extended more than some of the other ones that I've shown in the past. And the thing that I really wanted to show, especially with this picture, is you can see that fifth ray just behind the fifth metatarsal head, it's ground right through to the top cover. The reason for that is that he was corrected so much that the soft tissue was bulging under the first metatarsal. So to get that completely flat, I had to grind as much away as possible. So you can see that the posting does extend well past the cuboid to support it as well and keep that foot straight.
Good work. Good work.
Thank you. Yeah, so again, just a shot from behind, you can see that there is a little bit more varus attitude to the right device. You can see that the arch profile is a little bit higher. It in no means that there's a lot less correction to the left one. But there is a little bit less. I did, however, check this guy's leg length, and there was a little bit of a leg length, very, very subtle, but it wasn't consistent. So I found that the ASI, so the anterior superior iliac spine and the iliac crest, were high on the right. But when I turned him around and took a look at him from the posterior superior iliac spine, it was reversed. So that did indicate that there was a little bit of imbalance in the hips. And it was probably only about, I mean, I was eyeballing it. It was less than 5 millimeters. So I left it alone in this case just because he's got so much more foot correction than he's ever had. I didn't want to throw a whole bunch at him.
Hey, Gord.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was he tolerant, especially by that sustentaculum tali area, of having that much correction through the device?
Surprisingly, yes. Again, it was one of those things where the guy put it on and he was like, wow, this feels really good. So
yeah, that's what I always worry about is,
yeah.
correcting so much is that, you can build a device that looks awesome, but then you get them on and they can't be compliant with it because it's just too much.
Yeah, and you're adjusting right out of the gate, and that's one thing I aim to not have to do. And the ironic thing is, I find the more aggressive I am in the casting, but the less aggressive I am in the posting,
right? Sure.
The more comfortable and the more tolerant they're going to be. Like it looks like my posting is aggressive, but most of that, and that's why I discerned between extrinsic and intrinsic correction. So most of my correction is captured in the cast, and then the rear foot post is just a stabilizer. It just holds it in that position. So that's why when you look at it, the left one doesn't look like it has any correction to it. Now you will see when you look at the grinding, if you go back again, Colin, for a sec, sorry, I'm bouncing all over the place. If you look at the center of the heel on that left one, you will see that it did not go through to the device. I did that on purpose. Remember I said that there was a bit of a leg length difference and I didn't correct it? Well, I corrected it by maybe a millimeter, which most of you would think, well, that's nothing. But I found in what I've done over the years, a millimeter can make a difference. So I just let that slide. But yeah, thanks, Colin. If you want to go back to the other one that we were just at, yeah. So you can see it doesn't really look like I did much external posting to the device, and I didn't. That's kind of how they sat. There was a slight bit of waviness to the back of the heel cup. I just cleaned that up, and those are, there was a little bit more varus posting to the right one, but not much. Most of that is casting captured within the cast. Yeah. So I don't know if
Great work.
I don't think I took a picture. Yeah, I took that just to give you a perspective of the side of the lateral wall. And you can see about where the CDAS symbol is, just slightly ahead of the CDAS symbol. I started to roll the footbed out. I heated it up a little bit and rolled it out just so it wasn't digging into the soft tissue. But I like to keep that lateral wall as high as I can. We know within the limits of fitting it into the ski boot. I mean, that's obviously a limiting factor. I think that I do tend to make the medial walls a little bit high, but that can always be adjusted.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think that's three pretty good and comprehensive case studies. Any questions coming in from the guys? Let me have a quick look. No questions. We've got 16 people watching, 6 likes. Well, we must
Okay,
have bored
guys.
them all with really good footbeds. So I'm going to throw this one open to Billy and see what have you got for us.
Hey, Colin, why don't you bring up picture number 23?
Oh, well, you're working backwards, are you? Okay.
Well, changing it up a little bit. So you've got your client in, and they are complaining about certain things. Foot doesn't feel right in the boot, but then you take the insole out, and this is what you find. So great that something is better than nothing, but this definitely isn't going to work. That scaphoid pad is too far forward. The varus wedge is too big for that size foot. And if this is what you find, you just want to make them an insole and be done with it and get on the right track. So the takeaway to this is what you're sometimes going to find when you take that factory installed insole out of that boot. And I would not play with this. I would just say, let's make you another insole, and switch over to picture 24. And you can see that scaphoid pad is just not placed correctly. It needs to be ground down. It's just going to impact the way that interfaces inside the boot. So
nasty.
What's that?
It was just nasty.
Yeah. So we all get to see those clients. They walk in, and we all assess things differently. But the one thing, and you can get the picture off the monitor now. Look, when you first are working with that client, have them walk around with you. Watch how they walk. Watch how they walk from the front. Watch how they walk from the rear. Notice where their wear patterns are on their shoes. See it, like bring them close to something to lean against. See which arm they lean against something with. Sometimes you can discern whether they have a long leg, short leg by just the side that they always lean against. So do a lot of observation before you start getting them on the chair or in your conformable, molding platform, and look at what you're dealing with. Sometimes even just getting the insole out of their sneaker or shoe and seeing where the wear patterns are at is really telling. It's a great roadmap that you can follow and use for building a nicely comfortable and balanced insole for their ski boot. So I know when I get my clients in, the first thing that I'm doing with them is watching them, asking them a lot of questions, seeing what prior injuries they've had, if there's anything lower back, pelvic, femur, tib, fib, or foot injuries. And more oftentimes than not, we'll be halfway through the appointment while I'm molding their foot, and they'll say, "Oh, geez, you know what? 2 years ago, I fractured my femur. I forgot to tell you that." So, ask them to try to tease out as much information as possible out of your client. It's only going to be helpful to learn if there are imbalances, AB and adduction, leg length discrepancies, changes one side, like we saw in Gord's slides, where one side was more pronatory than the other, and you have to check leg length discrepancy at that point. Have them sit down in front of you. We want to look at them in a 90-90-90 aspect, grab their foot, see if that first ray is plantar flexed, dorsiflex, see where it is, see if it's flexible, move it up and down, see the relationship it has to the first to 2 through 5. You also want to see the relationship of the first through the 5th has to the heel plane. So you want to have a hopefully a planar aspect, a parallel aspect between the heel and the front of the foot. And if you don't, you want to kind of discern why it's there and whether there needs to be some sort of accommodation, or we can just let that first, if it is dorsiflexed, just kind of fall down to the insole so that there's not a false forefoot varus when you're in the molding aspect on your when you're molding them for an orthosis or a device. I'll just show you one orthosis when things go wrong. I'm sorry, I'm just looking through my pictures right now. Bring up picture number 7. So you can see when this was casted, they placed what they thought was a neutral position. This device also had a heater attached to it. You're going to see a little bit of a cut mark in it with a channel ground into it. But look how big that forefoot varus posting is in that insole. It was just a false forefoot varus posting, which never should have been there. And literally when I saw that client and I pulled that out of the boot and I saw that, the first thing I did was have him sit down and just start seeing where that first ray was, up, down, and how mobile it was. And just, it doesn't need to be there. Also, in that posting, bring up picture 8, Colin. So you can see that the posting was really brought too far forward and extended into the metatarsal area. And when you're making a device, you should really be ending that post really just behind those metatarsal heads, just distal of those metatarsal heads. And I find this on so many of the insoles that come into my shop. They are just posted wrong. They're posted too far forward, and they're taking up valuable space inside of that ski boot. All right. So with assessment, it's very important to kind of have a groove that you get into and check and tick off all those check marks so that you can go through and see what the foot is. And then once you're ending up molding them, and like Gord said about having those intrinsic corrections and accommodations right on the cast, if you can do most of the work there and then just do some posting on the bottom of the device, you're going to be better off. It just is much more comfortable. And remember that we're not trying to block out motion inside the ski boot and the foot. We're just trying to get that rear foot, and especially that Achilles tendon, if we can get that more perpendicular to the floor and not have it at an angle, we're much better off. And then once we have that rear foot really well supported, the forefoot can just kind of do its own thing. And in a ski boot, I think that's really important. And a lot of devices that I see in the shop are just locking that foot up. They're not giving it enough motion that is needed. And I'm not talking about a lot of motion, but we're talking about motion that adds some shock absorption and aids in articulation inside those, at those bones inside the foot. So I know in my assessment, I'm checking out a lot of flexibility ranges of motion. And one thing that we've touched on in other discussions is to really assess that dorsiflexion, how much they have or how much they don't have. And you're going to find the better you get with it, that they're just not going to have really enough to be comfortable inside the ski boot and having their heel kind of float because the floor is not being brought up to the foot or the device again underneath the liner. So to me, I'd much rather have initially a boot and an insole that has a fore-aft balance to it, correct, right out of the the starting gate. And if we can just achieve that, then the rest is just cake. You're going to have a happy clients. Even if you got that fore-aft balance done and just build them an accommodative insole, you're 3/4 of the way there, really, and you're just going to make happier skiers. You're going to make return skiers, and that's where we're here in business. We want to have people knocking on our doors, coming in our doors, buying more things, and you want to have them relaying the good time that they had with you to their friends. So you're going to get a lot of people off of those referrals. Now, if you make something bad, they're going to tell more people that it was bad. So you're better off making it right off out of the get-go. So I think with the time that we have left, I'm going to go and just look at some of the what can go wrong at this point. And I know I've used this insole before my starting one. And Colin, if you could bring up picture one.
Just finding picture one for you. There we go.
All righty. So this is an insole that a client that came into me a few years ago, complaining that the boots just really don't feel good. The boot's not right. Something's wrong. And you can just see so many problems happening here. And, start from the top to the bottom, the toe box shaping is just so incorrect. In fact, on that left insole, it was trimmed by a pair of scissors, cut by cut. It wasn't even radiused. It was just cut, 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 cut. So it was wrong out of the get-go from there. Moving back in the width shaping is totally incorrect. There's way too much of that device on that lateral border, which is curling up. You can see the curl to it that was caused by not fitting correctly or interfacing correctly with the liner and or the shell. And moving back on that left insole, the heel shaping is just totally incorrect. You can see kind of the diamond shape on that posterior end, that distal end of it, which is just wrong. It's not shaped right for the client. They're probably not even touching that part of the insole at this point. And really what's critical here is that with this insole, I could look down inside the liner when it was in the shell, and this thing was just perched up on its side. It wasn't even sitting flat inside the liner. So even if they would have cleaned this one up and made it interface correctly with the liner, you would have had a much happier client. And then look at that big honking, area on that right orthosis back by the that medial heel, that sustentaculum tali area, just folded over, digging right into that client's foot, just wrong as could be. So let's go to the picture number 2. And there's just another view of that. You can see just how things are not aligning right. You can start to see right by that first metatarsal head on both of these insoles where that creasing is happening. And that creasing is happening because this device is too long for the liner and too long for the shell too. So they didn't trim it out right for a better interface. And next one, Colin. And then you can see, how bad the grind job is on this and what they had to do to try to make this much more comfortable for the client. And on that right orthosis, you can see that how much of that heel counter, that heel posting was taken away because that orthosis was rolling in and digging into the client's foot. And it really had nothing to do with the posting. It just had to do with the trim job on this thing. And you can see on that lateral side of that right insole, it's just really high, really forward, way too forward than it should be in my estimation. All right, next slide. And you can see a better shot of those crease marks too, of where this device was too long, creasing because it had to do something inside that liner and shell to just be there and kind of be relatively flat. And next slide. And you can see the posting job on this. And I don't fault the person making this, but they just need to know what the device should look like in the end and how to kind of get there. This person had no idea of what this device should look like at the end point. So they winged it, and the heel counter, the posting, the grind marks, everything was very off kilter. Next one. And as I spoke earlier about the postings being too far forward, you can see this is just, it's got a horrible grind on it. The post is too far forward. It extends into the metatarsal head impression area and just taking up valuable space inside that ski boot, that real estate, that space that's so needed in that area. So, and I drew those black lines in just to kind of give an example of probably where I would have trimmed that to. The heels are ground deep. It's not very flat either. There's kind of spacing in the middle of that posting area too. So there's a lot of things going on here. All right, next slide. All right, this was again that false 4-foot Varus post that you got to be really, really wary of. And when you're finishing off the orthoses, and if you do have something in that area, I would prefer that it really be ground flat and let that metatarsal, that first ray, fall into it, especially if it's flexible and can fall into it. And also on this orthoses, the kydex that's used in this is way too stiff with the combination of this thermocork and the kydex, so that there was no motion in this insole whatsoever, especially with that first ray 4-foot Varus posting. It's so critical to have some bit of motion in these insoles. You're just going to create very unhappy skiers. Next one. All right, that's just the top covering on this. Next picture. So here's another one that made out of like an acrylic blank material, and the acrylic is really ultra stiff. So that coupled up with that red posting material, which was brought way too far forward in relation to the metatarsal impression area, and then adding a heel wedge onto it, which really, in my estimation, just kind of screws things up from that point on and should be placed on the Zeppa underneath the liner inside that boot. Next slide. So here's the top surface. So the shaping's not that bad on this. It's I can work with this. I might take a little bit of that lateral border that in that kind of fifth med area to the fifth toe, just slightly taper it out also, and maybe also taper out where the first med is also, just slightly, just to narrow the insole out a bit. And next slide. And here was a big part of it that, this was a sharp acrylic edge, which literally when you pushed past the padding of the top covering was pretty darn sharp. And I've had instances with clients that came in with calluses that were actually blisters from a sharp edge of a device pushing up into their foot. And it felt like a callus, but if you would cut a little deep into that callus, it was a water-filled, like almost like a bursa sac in there. And also with this insole, if you notice that the posting is done much more pronatory, there's that kind of pronatory lowering of that medial side in this post. So it's not really even ground right. And then to continue the flaring and the feathering of the acrylic and then the red posting material to the heel lip, you can see that extreme angle that they've used, which is really not correct too. We want to make sure that insole kind of stays put inside the liner, and we want to have that angle not as steep as that, somewhat more shallow. So there's some things going on here which I really don't like. Next slide. All right, again, and this is you can see on that lateral border, that acrylic is real close to touching that foot. And when the acrylic is ground this thin, it's not razor sharp, but it's pretty darn sharp. And we definitely don't want that pressing anywhere on that client's foot. And that lateral border to me also is a little bit more round than it should be. I would have flared that out somewhat and kind of lowered that down, just so that we wouldn't have that acrylic pushing into the foot. I don't recall what this client had said to me about that area, but just looking at it now, I wouldn't have wanted that as much pushing up into the foot. And then next slide, I think that's 14. Here's another one that I had. This is a number of years ago with thermocork. The top blank material is a little bit more flexible, but with that thermocork in there, it's just so rigid, this device. It had no motion, no nothing, and this client was complaining about just this thing hurting. They didn't feel like it fit their foot right. The arch didn't feel like it was in the right place. There was too much correction happening. Plus also that thermocork has been pulled too far forward into the metatarsal impression area, and again, taking up really, really a lot of space where you don't really have a lot of space in a ski boot. So, and a combination of the metatarsal area being pulled too far forward and it being very inflexible, you get a very unhappy client, which you want to turn them around pretty quickly. So the next slide, you can see the shaping on this wasn't too bad, but it was just really, really stiff, inflexible. That the rear of that heel area, that radius is a little low for me, and maybe that medial border would have, the medial border would have come down a little bit, and maybe even that lateral height would have come down, but not too much. The shaping's not too bad on this. It's just pulled way too far forward. And if you look underneath that first metatarsal head on the posting, you can see that line that I drew of where really that posting should end. And so you can see how much extra material is right there. And how are we doing on time, Colin? We're at an hour. Right?
Yeah, we're just on an hour. You know, you've got 18 to 22 still to go, and then you're done.
Okay, so let's go to the next one. So here's another one that the blank material was way too stiff, and for me, it had a high medial border at the longitudinal arch of the insole. So I would have probably brought that down a little bit because I really feel the interfacing between that and the liner, or that and particularly the shell. If I would have placed that in the shell, I'm sure I would have gotten the insole not even sitting flat inside the shell, and also that border at the heel. You can see how low that is. I suspect that this insole was slightly short when the technician made this and lowered that heel so they could be slid forward just slightly and maybe get more of the toes on the insole also. And next one. All right, shaping on this, it's a little bit wide on that lateral side. It's probably something that's just taking and just creating a little bit less width in that fifth and sixth toe area. Next slide. And again, noted that there was very stiff insole blank, and you can see that posting has come up to like that first metatarsal area too. Whether that's needed or not, I don't even know at this point. I just ended up making them a new insole too. Let's go. So here's a heat damaged insole that wasn't really shaped very well, plus also wasn't ground very well. So another thing to check and make sure with your clients, if you're using a lower temperature type blank material, is to tell your clients not to use a lot of heat inside the boot. If they're putting, with the regular boot heaters, it's not going to put that much heat in. But after a while, these things are going to take the brunt and melt on you. Next one. And you can see the grind jobs on these. The heel is ground really deep. The forefoot's weird. Everything just kind of looks really strange on this. Part of it is being heat affected by the heat, but this is another one that I just took out of the whole mix. And
you're all done.
And just go back to that 23 again. And again, just to reiterate, if this is what you find, then just make them a new insole and be done with it and make them really happy. And that's where I'm going to leave this as the green flag here is, don't work against City Hall, work with City Hall, and just don't search for red herrings.
Okay, so we only actually have one question in here, which is we must have either got a load of people that know exactly what they're doing, or people are scared to ask questions. Please, guys, do ask questions. That's what the whole idea is. We've got, we're just over an hour. We normally don't go past the hour, but we can give it 10 more minutes if we need to. If you've got any questions, get them in now. But one that has come in from Dick Thomas: semi-weight bearing or standing up on the vacuum? What do you take into account when making this decision? Good
question. Gord, go for that one.
Yeah, so I actually pretty much only do semi-weighted. I rarely do standing. What I will do is once I get the cast set and I've got the footbed molded into the cast, I will have the person stand up and put about 75% of their weight just on their heels, just to set that heel cup and spread it out a little bit. And that's for about 5 to 10 seconds maximum. And I just don't want it to interfere and with the casting and make it a compensated cast. I don't like doing weight bearing because it's garbage in, garbage out. Most people just even, not even myself included, a lot of us really aren't capable of getting a properly corrected, fully weighted cast. It's not easy. I just find it's a lot easier to make a semi-weighted cast and get it as corrected as possible, and then you don't have to. You can use a more flexible device, as opposed to getting full weighted and using a rigid device. That's old school. That's what a lot of the old pods do and still do, and that's the way a lot of the orthotic labs will do it. Is even though they're using a non-weight bearing cast, they will over or under correct it and just slush fill the orthotic and then make it a really rigid device. We want to make a dynamic device from a semi-weighted or even non-weighted position.
Yeah, I remember my biomechanics professor in New York saying, if anybody wants a really good way to make some bad orthotics, there's some crush boxes in the corner and you can use them weight bearing.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I use crush boxes.
Weight bearing guy.
I use crush boxes in my practice almost exclusively, but they're same method as I use for these casting techniques in the shop. It's the 90-90-90, as Billy had mentioned earlier, and the client has no input into how it's being put into the foam. So yeah, I just find that works best for me.
Yeah, I'll just add in here that I agree with Gord on that. With the, it's very, very few times I'm making a fully weighted appliance, insole orthotic. It's all semi-weight bearing.
Yeah, I would say that the one situation where I would use fully weight bearing is a rigid pes cavus, and that's just to get that natural, what little pronation is available to take its position, and to ensure that rather than trying to create it in the cast, and just to ensure that that supinated position doesn't get exaggerated in a semi-weight bearing position. But you have to be careful in that situation because the foot can supinate more in a weight bearing position with a pes cavus. So you have to be careful.
I often take my cast in semi-weight bearing. I'll then have the client stand so I can just have a look at it, make sure visually everything's good, because they are going to be standing when they're in their ski boots. So I want to see that everything's in the good position. But yeah, that rigid cavus one is the nightmare foot because it can flip itself any way it wants to go. Usually out.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why it's so important to look at, as Billy mentioned earlier, to look at the forefoot to rear foot relationship. And when you've got a forefoot valgus, if it's a rigid forefoot valgus or a rigid plantar flex first, you've got to address that. I mean, that's one of the biggest things I've seen fail in footbeds that have come into me is people have made a great footbed, but they haven't looked at the forefoot to rear foot relationship. And just simply by putting a little bit of a post under the lateral side of the foot, all of a sudden things are much better.
Well, there's no more questions come in. So unless you guys have got anything to add, I think we should probably wrap this up so we don't bore the few remaining people we have watching to sleep.
All right.
I know the last 20 minutes that I talked probably put people to sleep. So the first 35 to 40 minutes, I know people were really engaged with Gord.
Well, I'm sorry that I hogged the time, Billy. I know it was good to see. No, it was really good to see those footbeds. And get your critique on them. It's really a good thing to see because I haven't actually seen a lot of or kept a lot of old footbeds. I just sort of look at them and go, yeah.
Spin it.
Yeah.
Throw it.
Yeah. I know. Okay. I know that with some of the responses we've got on the forums lately about anecdotal impressions and things that people have heard down the line. We've heard a lot of myths, and I definitely thank you, Gord, for dispelling some of those myths because they really are hurting kind of the things we're shooting for.
Yeah. I mean, the problem is what we're doing. There's a lot of kind of in our own. It's like, well, this is what we do. And this is what works. So because I said so, and I know in my little note, I said, we're not going to accept because I said so. But
Right.
I mean, when you're going upstream against everyone, I think, there's a certain amount of stuff that we do that's accepted. Maybe there isn't research behind it to prove it, but there's so much anecdotal information that when somebody comes out with something as bold and out on a limb as that one comment, I was
Uh-oh.
happy to engage.
We've lost Gord.
Oh, okay. I'm back, I
No, we
think.
got you.
You're back.
Okay. I was really interested in finding out how an orthotic creates ACL injuries, because I'll tell you, I've had a bunch of them, and I wasn't wearing an orthotic any time that I had them. They were all much before I used my orthotic. And we have an orthopedic surgeon in the crowd. I was kind of hoping the orthopedic surgeon would step in, and I think really that. And it was probably a smart thing to sidestep it, because I don't think there's any research out there. And if there is, I want to know about it, because I want to know if I'm
Right.
doing something that's harming people. And
Oh, yeah.
I've never heard anything about it. That just blew my
Right.
mind. So
Right,
yeah.
guys. On that note, let's wrap it up. Thanks. Oh, hang on. Do you always? One last question. One last question. Do you always post heel stab, or do you mold in a transflux type reinforcement of the insole and leave it dynamic?
That's a good question. You want to grab that, Billy? I'm going to grab a sample out of my shoe, and you go ahead and answer from your perspective.
I know for a ski boot insole, I'm posting the heel. I'm not leaving it just round and letting it kind of find its own center. I feel that if we can stabilize the heel and create a perpendicular Achilles to the floor and have that Achilles follow the channel in the liner, to me that works a lot better to kind of capture where I want that foot to be. So in my practice for ski boot insoles and orthoses, I'm actually posting. Now I will vary the actual durometer of the posting material depending upon what I want to do. So if I post with a very, very soft material to allow a little bit of motion in there, that is giving you some of that that motion, which can be related to having no posting on it, but just with some bit of stability. Go ahead, Gord.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Billy. And that's where I take into account the client's weight versus actually doing a weight bearing or non-weight bearing cast. I will, cast aggressively and then maybe post less. Like for a lighter person, I will use a lower density material. I might grind the heel post I might grind the heel of the orthotic much flatter, almost through to the covering material to get that nice flat material or
aspect
platform. Yes, thank you. This is one I experimented with. I don't know if you can see it very well. This is one of the MasterFit gate blanks. It's the type that actually flexes. I had these made on the CDAS system. You can see I used the rhinoplast material that CDAS has available for reinforcement. And then I used the extra piece that actually came out of this hole just to support at the sustentacular tali. You can see there's a little bit of a gap. Sorry, I'm on the wrong side there. A little bit of a gap here, but there's that nice flat platform here. And this I use in my shoes. It's got a functional hallux limitus accommodation, and I've got some lateral forefoot posting. These were just experiments. I had another podiatrist I worked with in Japan cast me, and then we molded them, and this is the footbed I made. So I don't always use a rigid heel stabilizer, but this gives enough stabilization through the device in combination with the thickness of the material from the MasterFit blank. And I've actually found this is what I'm using all the time as my orthotic, despite having a whole bunch of other ones. It's comfortable.
Are you using that in your ski boot too?
No, I'm actually just using this in my shoe. In my ski boot, I've got a completely bare XT Sprint carbon fiber made off of a cast. that goes to the sulcus. So basically my first, fifth, and heel are sitting on it. And it does have a EVA rear foot stabilizer with a built-in lift because I'm short and stubby and have limited ankle range of motion.
I think the whole thing with this is there is no simple correct answer. I've got depending on the flexibility of the foot, depends on the product we use and how we finish it.
Absolutely.
The geometers of the plastic, whatever. Gentlemen, we have made 1 hour and 15 minutes of probably the most boring live broadcast in the history of live broadcast. I'm going to say good night, and we'll chat when we get back off the other side. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll be back sometime soon with another subject. If you've got some suggestions, get them up in the group forum, and we'll have a look and see what we can find. Good to see you guys.
Thanks for coming out, everyone.
Safe. And
Be safe, everybody.
as a good friend of mine says at the moment, remain positive, test negative.